What's up guys, Jake here, aka Prophisee. I'm going to be doing a beat breakdown of the song So Damn Fine off my new album. It's probably the most complicated song and it took the longest to make, so I figured it'd be interesting. And it's in the style of the producer SwuM. Let's go ahead and listen to a snippet and see what it sounds like.
I'm sipping on you like some fine wine though, and when it's over, I press rewind though. Hey, I got a Glock in my arm. Hey, 17 shots, no 38. Hey, I got a Glock in my arm. Hey, 17 shots, no 38. Baby girl, you're so damn fine though. I'm trying to know if I can hit it from behind though. I'm sipping on you like some fine wine though, and when it's over, I press rewind though. Hey, I got a Glock in my arm. Hey, 17 shots, no 38. Hey, I got a Glock in my arm. Hey, 17 shots, no 38.
Okay, so as you can see, I think it's pretty cool. It's got 57 tracks and it's a little over 5 minutes. There's a lot going on, and I'm gonna break down pretty much every step in how this all got made. So the first thing I'm gonna do is go into my splice. If you guys don't use splice, you definitely should. It's free and it basically just tracks the versions of your songs as you make them. So I can go back here. This is the 8th version of this song. From 36 weeks ago. It's pretty old, and I'll go ahead and open this up. Cool. So the first thing I'll show is I like to start all of my songs in the session view, and I like to start with the composition. And so for the composition here, you'll notice the project is actually called Deal. And it's called Deal because the chords for the main song, or the main part of this song, are actually the chords for the song Deal by the Grateful Dead. It's got a pretty cool vibe. I really like the use of this diminished chord at the end. And so I basically started with this chord progression. And I also came up with a few alternate chord progressions. And so I've got those 3 here in the session view. So this is the main Grateful Dead part. You'll see right here's the nice diminished chord, I think. That's it. Okay, so we've got that's the main part, and then the next section, I think that's actually the same. And then right here, this is the first breakdown, I think. And I believe this is just the relative minor. Sounds pretty cool. So I started with this, and then you can see there's a few other sections here that have some of the motifs that are used throughout the rest of the song. So you can see it sounds pretty well different though. This guitar part here actually is hiding in the song, very subtly layered, but when I first started that was the main thing. And there's a little guitar here that sounds really nice, but this actually didn't make the cut for the final song. And then here's the sucker delays. I think the melody that they play is actually different, but they're probably one of the catchiest parts of the main section. And then I think there's also right here, this is B section melody. And so basically how I like to come up with all of this is it's a lot easier to figure out whether something sounds bad after you've made it as opposed to coming up with something new in your head and thinking about whether it'll sound good. So that's why I've got parts here that actually never got used in the final track like this. Even though this is kind of a cool little thing. But basically just like to throw in lots of layers. And once I have, lots of tracks, start cutting things back a little bit. So that's what I started with, and then this song was definitely an interesting place in my production journey also, because this is probably the first song I finished where I thought that it was actually worth listening to be honest. And the reason I had a hard time with that is I wasn't particularly good at arranging, because I worked in the session view like this. I'd get stuck with lots of projects that look like this, and wouldn't be able to turn them into arrangements. So, I've got my first arrangement here, and I don't think it's actually particularly compelling. But what I discovered as I continued working on this track is that when it comes to arranging, all that matters really is whether the next section that you're bringing in sounds good. So I would attempt to, architect the entire structure of the song, in my head before I even started arranging. And as I've gotten better at it, I've just started taking different sections and moving them around and dragging stuff. And, whenever you go from A to B and it sounds good, ultimately, if you just keep stringing together transitions like that, you'll end up with a song that has a compelling arrangement. And so that's kind of how I ended up with the structure that I have here. There's some other fun layers. This little percussion is actually layered in there also very subtly, which is kind of fun. So that's that. And so now I'll go back to the original project, which I believe is this one. Okay, so now we're back in the original. This is actually the final master. Let me turn, it's already off. And I guess I'll just break down some interesting parts from the beginning through the end. So we've got the intro here, and that just starts with the chords. The chords themselves are this massive stack of, that's not it, of layered electric pianos. They're all frozen here. The main one is this patch called Trans Am Piano. It kind of sounds like an engine revving. I basically just have filter cutoff automation on these. You can see the device right there. So these start low passed, and then as I bring the highs in, as I bring the highs in, there's automation somewhere that makes them quieter. I can't find it. Oh yeah, right here. You can see there's automation on the master. Let me pause it while I'm talking. There's automation on the master here. So to prevent the intro from being super quiet, the volume starts out higher, and as the highs come out on the pianos, I bring the master down a little bit. Then we just go into the A section here. So this is another interesting part about this song is you probably noticed in the earlier version it didn't have an acapella. So in terms of getting the SwuM type sound, that's not actually what I was going for when I started this track. I initially just started with the chords because I thought they were cool, and eventually, I honestly didn't like the track that much, because if I take the acapella out here, it's not particularly exciting. So I was kind of looking to add life to it, just trying out different acapellas, and then once I found this one and threw it on, I thought it really actually brought the track to life, and that's kind of what inspired me to keep working on it. As far as getting acapellas, you can either get them from YouTube. I can link some tutorials on how to use Soundflower to track in stuff from YouTube. Or there's another website called acapellasforyou.co.uk that has lots of free acapellas you can download if you sign up. So I think that's actually where I got this particular acapella. It was from that website. So we'll go into the bass section here. So another interesting part, this wasn't super obvious to me when I was starting out, is transitions, I think, in a lot of popular music today are usually pretty elaborate, and it's not really obvious, how to get good sounding transitions. And I've actually just went on Splice and looked at some projects that sounded good, and kind of figured that to get a good sounding transition, you just really layer a bunch of crap. And so for me, I have a tag in Live 10 here for transitions, and these are just a bunch of interesting sounding, sweeps and whatnot. Another big thing is terminology too. Like if you're looking for samples, you really have to know what to search for. So ambience is a great word. If you just search for ambience, you get all kinds of cool stuff that sounds like this. But so you also need to know for a downlifter, that's something like this. So it's kind of like you brought in a more exciting part of the song and you want to release some of the tension that you built up. You'll use these downlifters. And then the opposite of a downlifter is an uplifter. Let me stop that. Or a riser. And so an uplifter is basically just a reversed downlifter. So basically to build these transitions, you can just layer those. You can see that's what I did right here is we've got a downlifter here and I just reversed it and it builds up. So I've got this whole transition section soloed and you can hear what this sounds like after I play it through. Looks like I had more crap in here that I cut out. And then there's some little clicks, which doesn't sound that good on its own, but in context, it really just adds some flavor. I usually take the same approach when I'm making transitions and just start dragging stuff around from this little transitions bank and see what sounds good and then work backward and cut back, as opposed to trying to go through these and imagining which ones will sound good together. Usually if I come up with something that sounds really good on a transition like this, I'll do it by accident and I'll be like, oh, that sounds cool. So that's the transition, and then so that transition there takes you into the B section chords. So there's probably a few things I can talk about here. So you'll actually notice, so what are the drums in this song, right? So I did a few things with the drums. So the bass for this song is this drum loop that I found. It kind of has like a stumbling vibe that I thought sounded particularly good. And so this drum loop is only 2 bars, so that would be extremely repetitive if I were to just leave it at that. But I did some tricks to make things more exciting. So if you can see right here, you can just take different sections of the song and you can of the drum loop and you can repeat them to add variation. So that here, as opposed to the normal ending for the loop, is a little bit different, gives a little bit of flavor. And so I do the same thing at the end of like probably every 16 bars or something like that. And then you can also just drop the drum loop out. So I do that in a bunch of places. And so the other thing that you can do is take the drum loop and extract the individual hits. And so in the intro here, you can hear I've got a different rhythm. But it doesn't sound different, and that's because this is a drum rack. So actually you can just take this waveform and you can right click and do where is it, slice to new MIDI track, and then when you do slice to new MIDI track, it will automatically create all of these slices here for you. And so then you can see there's a kick, there's a little weird thing, there's a snare. So I used those to build this alternate rhythm here. And then there's another rhythm over here. So initially I really didn't like this section. It's still probably my least favorite part of the song. But one thing that I added, and this was actually just came about from the opposite approach and thinking like, what would sound good, like what's missing here, which I don't usually do. But in this case, you know, I thought that some big tom hits like these would sound cool. Like these would sound cool. And so found tom, big floor, punchy. Another huge tip is to use OTT on everything. This is multi-band dynamics preset, and so you can listen to this. Here's it without OTT, and then here's it with OTT. And I can actually crank it up so you can hear it a little more. Watch me turn it up. It just makes everything sound huge. It totally squashes it. OTT stands for over the top. So in this configuration, it's kind of like a New York style parallel compression where I only have 13%. It just gives a little bit more loudness. Then I actually have a waves max bass on here to fill the bass out a little bit more. You can see without the max bass. Just adds a little bit, and then a ping pong delay, of course, makes it sound epic. And then really it's just a bunch of layers. We can solo some of the layers here. A lot of these are presets. I think this like trap marimba came from some tutorial. That's the best way to just find new sounds, is to just look for YouTube tutorials. So this one's called Trap Marimba. Presumably just search YouTube for Trap Marimba if you want this kind of vibe. And then there's a piano layered in there. Another cool tip is to make all of the instruments kind of work together. And so, you know, I've got the toms going, but one thing that kind of glues it together is there's this downward movement in the chords here. You can listen to that ba-da-da, and it gets progressively louder. It gives another nice effect. So then it just goes back to the A section, and so I actually repeat pretty much the same exact loop for a large part of this song. The only reason it works is at the beginning it plays this set of pianos, and then how long is this? Then after 16 bars of that, I switch it up. And that's just enough of a refrain to keep things interesting. Then I think it goes back, actually. Yeah. And then it's that same thing when it comes back into the B section and switches back to the original chords. So sometimes less is more. To easily just create an entire new compelling section, I just changed one layer of the electric pianos here, and it was enough to give it a totally new vibe. And so that's all pretty much the same. Oh, and then the other thing that adds excitement is, I believe I've got, I think this. And then I've got that little guitar I was talking about earlier. You can see that's like super subtle. You can hardly hear it. But then the main thing, and this is after a full 24 bars of the same loop. So 16 bars I had to change out one of the pianos, and then 24 bars I had to add this layer in the background, and that keeps it all sounding interesting. And so that gets to this last B section here, and this is actually my favorite part of the song, so we can listen to the transition into this. So the first part, this is kind of just like a chill breakdown vibe. One thing that I messed a lot with that kind of defined the character of this section was, if I can find the drums. Yeah, these are the drums right here. You can see there's a lot of automation on just this snare. So the snare gets progressively quieter, and then there's a dub delay on it, and so you can hear the dub delay. It just gives it a really chill vibe. Dub delay is like really popular in reggae for that reason. And then it also gets progressively drier. So at the beginning it has a ton of reverb on it, and then as it comes into the main drum loop, there's less reverb. And so if all of this automation was gone here, the delay would just be too much. You can see it's like the snare's bouncing all over the place. But if you dial it back a little bit, it still works. And then this part is, I think, really the coolest part. And so to get this whole vibe, the first part is there's a Thunderstorm layer. This is SwuM FX Thunderstorm from the SwuM drum kit. Got to use the SwuM drum kit at all times. It's a very good drum kit. So you can just listen to that. It's just thunder, but it really sounds cool in context. So there's a Thunderstorm, and then, so what this is my Behringer Model D clone. So this is an analog synth, but in all honesty, you don't need an analog synth. My go-to if you're looking for something along these lines, if you have Live Suite, a hidden gem is this bass. Bass sounds huge, and I find it sounds just like the Model D. And really, the bread and butter of the Model D for me has been making bass lines and not leads like this. And this bass plugin will get you that. Just as part of Live Suite. The other thing you can use is if you have the Native Instruments collection, they have a synth called Monarch that'll give you the same vibe. But really, I think the synth matters here less than the reverb. So I can just solo this, and I can take out the reverb. And so without the reverb, it's very vanilla, very boring. But the reverb just brings it to life. And so the reverb that I used here, I got a UID Apollo Twin, and they definitely got me with their promotion. I got the plugins that come with it. But one of the two that I got was this EMT 140, and it does sound amazing. Use it on everything. But really, if you can just find any plate reverb, and replicate these settings, it should give you a pretty similar vibe. But I find plate reverbs are my favorite reverbs, especially if you're looking for like a chill layer along these lines. So just listen to that. So the other thing I did here is, as I played this in, I was physically twisting the knob on the cutoff filter, and I think that's a thing that as a new producer, it's a little bit scary, or you think is not the right thing to do, is to just manually record yourself doing some automation. With quantization and everything like that, it's so easy to just, click around and, draw in your automation. But if you do something like this, it might feel like you're being sloppy, but it actually gives it more of like a human vibe. And you can't see the automations, but the changes that I'm making are almost kind of random. It's not like it's, building up and falling down. I'm just like bringing it in and taking it out, but that just subtle movement gives it a really cool vibe. And then, the other, so then there's also this layer that's unique to that section. So it's just some whistles. Just some really spacey sounds, because it's got that chill breakdown vibe. Just find some spacey sounding stuff. But the other thing that defines this section that's really cool, and this is another thing that you can really just try with any sound, and you'll be amazed at the results you get, is, where is it? I can't find it. So many tracks. It is, right here. So just I took the Fetty Wap acapella, I think it was just this section, and just drop it into, where'd it go? Drop it into a simpler, but the default simpler settings aren't what you want. This is another thing that I learned after just watching a crap ton of YouTube tutorials, is what you want to do is you want to set playback to through. And so what that does is when you hit the sample, instead of just playing this individual slice, it'll play all the way through until you select another slice. Oh, and you want to be in this slice mode. And so when you're in slice mode, you can just take the sample chopped up and play it in random places. And so I do this all the time. Just if you're looking for an extra layer, take some random acapella, or you can take a drum loop, or you can take, a saxophone section. But throw it into simpler with these settings, play around with it. Here I've got another dub delay. It's the Dem Ducks on the new Live 10 Echo. So like with... And here it's kind of a subtle effect. And then I've got some high cut just to keep it feeling subtle. And I think actually really the main reason is when you'll do this, you can hear there's like some hi-hats that stayed in the acapella when they tried to cancel it out with the instrumental. And those kind of sound bad. So I probably would have actually preferred to leave those highs in, but the only reason I'm doing a high cut here is to get rid of that harsh like hi-hat sibilance on the top end there. And so lastly, coming out of this section, we get to the climax. And again, this is just, trying stuff and seeing what sounds good, but I found just taking the drums out sounds amazing. It's just one final little piece of ear candy. If I brought it in with the drums here, it sounds a little bit too much, but without the drums, it's a nice refrain from kind of all of the tension that's built up throughout the rest of the entire song.
Baby girl, you're so damn fine, though. I'm trying to know if I can hit it from behind, though. I'm sipping on you like some fine wine, though. And when it's over, I press rewind, though. Hey, I got a Glock in my arm. Hey, 17 shots, no 38. Hey, I got a Glock in my arm. Hey, 17 shots, no 38. Baby girl, you're so damn.
So you can see the drums do come back in. Oh yeah, another huge thing. The sucker delays are like a huge part of it. I mentioned that before. So you can hear those. This is the melody I ended up using there. And so that sounds dope, but the other key part of the vibe here is this rap piano. It's an Ableton preset. And the key, you could just really take any piano, cut the lows, and throw an OTT on it. But this rap piano riffing here, I don't think it actually... Yeah, it does reflect it. So really, to get this kind of vibe, you want a fair amount of reverb. So you can see the reverb is cranked. We're at like, 50% reverb dry wet. And then just apply a lot of compression. So you don't want the piano to fade out. You want that the compressor will actually make the beginning of the note quieter. So it's instead of having the piano be like one loud note that decays, it's just kind of like one continuous note. And I find that sounds really nice. Pretty much in any context, I use it. It's on probably like 5 or 6 songs on the rest of the album. That's pretty much it. Maybe one other thing I could mention is this totally just falls in the category of like trying stuff and seeing what works. I wanted some kind of like scratching effect to lead in to, and this happens at the beginning of the song and at the end here. I'm talking about this right here. So like when I made this, I actually was not particularly happy with it, but because it wasn't what I was going for at all. I wanted some other kind of vibe. So I was just searching my library for scratching samples. But for a while I just played with dragging these around and getting the timing right. So it's just like two scratches and then there's a little click. And I found it sounds pretty good. So to some extent, even if you're like going for some reference sound, if you can't get it exactly right, just trying to go for that sound and trying different stuff, you might come up with something that also works and sounds cool. So it's really important to just mess around. And that's pretty much it. If you guys have any questions, you can definitely let me know in the comments and I'll be happy to answer them. But yeah, start with the chord progression. The other thing you'll notice, I'll probably make a whole other video on like a good, process for making tracks, but start with the composition. Figure out what chords you want to use. That's kind of what I explained earlier. Once you've got the chords down, you go into a mode where you just keep adding sounds, and don't even really consider if you think they sound good or not. Just add different sounds and then pick your favorite ones later. And the ones you don't like, put them in a folder called scraps and come back to them later. Never just delete something if you could potentially use it later. Once you've got those sounds together, it's really important to start getting into arranging as much as possible. So you'll have a couple sections. Just try and see which ones sound to get good together. Try bringing things in, taking them out. Always add lots of layers on your transitions, and that'll help glue things together. What else? Once you've kind of got all of the arrangement done, that's where you can focus on dialing in those sounds more. Starting to get nitpicky about your reverbs and your compressor settings, but don't worry about that until you actually don't worry about perfecting a sound until you're actually going to use it and you've decided it has a place in the final mix. And then once you've got all that dialed in, that's where you can worry about actually mixing, which I didn't talk about too much, but the super basic mix that'll get you 80% of the way with 20% of the work is cut all of the high notes around all of the mids and high range instruments around 200 hertz, like 250, 240. Because if I look at, say, this trap marimba here, I'll take this off. This one's actually pretty good. I can probably find another instrument. Yeah, this one here. So if I take off this low cut, you can see there's just a ton of crap going on here. You might actually even be able to hear it, depending on what you're listening to. And just applying this low cut makes room for the bass and the kick drum. So that's the key part of mixing, is making sure there's room for your bass. And so once you've gone through that basic mix there, that's where you can move on to mastering, and that's like a whole other video. But to be honest with you, it doesn't matter all that much. Usually when I'm just sending stuff to people for feedback, you can go into audio effects, audio effect rack, mixing and mastering, and there's one buried here called full chain master. Just throw that on. It's a full chain master. And then you've got a master that honestly for me is good enough. I think if you actually take this and throw it on, it has some knobs that you can tweak. So when I use this, I'll usually turn up the stereo enhance. That sounds good. You can put some drive on and then leave things as is. What you really want to dial in when you're mastering is these compressor settings. But my master for this track is actually relatively simple anyways. I've just got an EQ here. You can put this in mid-side mode, which will EQ the edges of the stereo field versus the center differently. And what you really want is your low end to be mono. You don't want the low end to sound different in left and right channels because that can sound muddy and you can get phase cancellation and stuff like that. So you can see in the middle, I have a low cut at 26 hertz because I want to leave, that's about where you can't hear stuff because it's too low. And then, but on the side, I've got the cut at 100 hertz because I don't want any bass in the edges of the stereo field. Then I've just got a multi-band compressor and parallel compression format, 36%. And then this was the other UAD plugin I got. It's just a tape machine that basically applies another layer of compression. And then a limiter. And then a plugin that I discovered when I was mixing this album is Levels. I don't know what it is now. I got it on Black Friday. I think it was like $35 or something, but it's really awesome. You can dial in a setting here like mastering for Spotify. And, you know, I could do a whole other video on mastering, but basically these are the parameters that you're tweaking, all of the things that go around this circle here. And the key one is you obviously don't want to clip. If you know what clipping is, if the audio signal exceeds 0 dB, then it gets chopped off. It sounds bad. This will make you leave an extra dB of headroom because when your audio gets transcoded for streaming services, won't sound good. And then the other thing here is the LUFS, which is basically the average loudness of the song. And literally all you do, so when you're mastering, you'll apply this compression just to glue everything together. And then this loudness is just how loud do you want your sound to be perceived. When the listener just has a fixed volume set that, they have it set at a given volume. If you crank up the loudness on this limiter, it's basically turning up the volume for the listener without them adjusting their volume control. And so this LUFS basically just determines that parameter. And so for like Spotify, you want it to be -14. Otherwise, they do loudness correction and they'll turn it down. And so mastering, it's probably a lot more simple than you think, to be honest. Like usually I'm just trying to dial in the LUFS and the peak, and then it has some other things. You want the stereo field to be balanced. You want enough range and loudness throughout your track. Bass space, already talked about that. Range, that's a different way to measure it. But yeah, overall, mastering, not that big a deal. And so, I mean, talking about this like it's easy because I already made the track, but this took me months to get this whole track. I'll probably share this on Splice, but yeah, to be honest, I probably the reason I'm probably not sharing it with this video is I don't want to share the whole track history because I don't want you guys to see how long it took me to make this. It took way too long. But anyway, yeah, that's So Damn Fine.